What is going on, family? It is good to see y'all here. I am gonna try a new thing out today. I am currently working on a new spirituality course. So, what happens is that people sometimes ask me for spiritual guidance, and I understand why people would do that with my history of reading astrology and this kind of thing. But I'm no real authority on the subject at all. I am in a place now where I'm going to try to cobble something together because I'm in the same position as everyone else is, where I am trying to cobble together a spirituality that makes sense in this moment, that is rooted in tradition, but that also sees the future that we live in, that we currently already live in, as something that is real and also viable. So in order to do that, then I am going to, just like me, I'm a new and different kind of person. I am something that the world has not really seen before, but I still got parents. I still got, like, I came from somewhere, you know what I mean? So my point is to create a new kind of spirituality that is also coming from somewhere, from wherever it is that uh, things like, you know, from the building blocks that already exist here. I'm trying to like move myself and spirituality in a new direction from those things. So, in order to do that, I've been working on an intro to spirituality course, and I think it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be real fun. But before I really get into a lot of the meat of that, I think that it's important for folks to I think it's important to document where I have come from. And so I'm going to do this kind of potentially long and navel gazing video here, where I'm going to talk through my own lineage. And so my own lineage is, I don't even know that this is going to be particularly interesting for you, but it will, at least once we make it to the point where there is an operable spirituality, then we will be able to go back and reference where I came from, and you'll be able to, for your own self, take what feels good for you and then cast off the rest of it. And for things that don't resonate with you, like, get rid of that shit. That's quite all right. I am no evangelist here. I don't think that you should practice spirituality the way that I practice spirituality, but I do hope to sort of be a model for some folks who, might need an idea about how to do it and what to do. So, in order to do that, I'm just gonna talk about me for a little while. I'm just gonna tell some stories from my life, basically, and you are welcome to come along for the ride. I like telling stories, and so if you want to hang out and listen to me tell some stories, then here we go. The first the first place to start when we're talking about like where my religion and spirituality comes from is we have to start from like who I even am, where I even come from. So I am my I when I say that I am a new kind of person, a lot of where I'm getting that from is I am a racial mix, an ethnic mix that doesn't really happen very often. So my dad is black and my mom is half white, half Native American, Prairie Band Potawatomi, if you were wondering. And so you just don't see that mix around very often. I've almost never found somebody who's the same race as me. And so it turns into this situation where, like, I'm American. And so that means that we have the one drop rule here in my country, which is to say that one drop of black makes you a black person. And so that continues to work. And so I am that way. Because I carry some black in me, I'm considered a black dude, and I feel that way, and I live that way. And so that is a fairly comfortable sort of identity marker, but it's also a situation where it's like if I'm in a room with a bunch of black people who have two black parents, for example, then like you notice that things are different for me, you know, like I'm a different kind of dude. And then, you know, but it's clear that I'm not white, right? None of the white people think I'm white. And also Indians don't think that I'm Indian. And they even made a choice to not really include me as part of their community when I was, even before I was born. They made a decision about blood quantum and how Indian you have to be in order to be considered Indian. And they made that decision before I was born, and I come in under that number, slightly, very slightly under that number. But as such, then I'm a new thing entirely. Like I'm not any of the things that are normal, that are easily understood in the racial dynamic or the ethnic dynamic that currently exists in the world. And as such, I kind of have a new approach or a new perspective, a different perspective than most folks would have. And so that is the thing that I am here to sort of use to cobble together a new kind of spirituality. So I started out in the church. I was super church heavy for a long time. I was really interested in doing I just loved the church. The church was like one of my favorite places to be as a youth. We went to black church. Oh yeah, what's up, Allie? Good, good to see you too. Thanks for being here. Um, yeah, I loved hanging out in the church. It was really felt like family. It felt like a situation where one of my favorite things that we used to do in the church was we had a whole period of time. I don't know how long it was, probably 10 minutes, 15 minutes or something like that, where all we did was we went around and everybody hugged everybody else. And so there was this sense of like community and togetherness that like felt so real to me. And while that was happening, there was music to go with it. And so what happened is I got really into music during that time. I mean, you know, like music is in my lineage on both sides. My dad was a pitch percussionist. He used to play marimba and vibraphone and stuff like that, as well as drums and stuff like that. But he like considered himself to be a little bit above a lot of the drum sort of situations, and so he would play pitch percussion and you know, these kinds of things. He was like a heavy musician. And then on my mom's side of the family, there was a lot of singing and choir direction and stuff like that. So music has always been like sort of born or bred into me, right? You know, I started out like really caring about being, my mom calls herself a chronic harmonic, you know, so we listen to music, and then while we're listening to music, then she's singing a harmony to, she's singing along, but she's not singing the melody. She's singing a harmony to that. And I find that I do that now as well. And it's a fun exercise to like see if you can find some consonant harmony. It is difficult. And I kind of like the difficulty of it. So anyway, so music has always been super important to me. And as I was coming up in the church, then the music of the church was like kind of the most important thing to me. Like I would spend all of my waking hours like preparing for church performances, which is like, man, a church gig is the best way to get good at music. Like there's just no way around it. If you got, you know, because at this point in my life, I'm going to church, you know, 3, 4 times a week, something like that. You know, we doing Bible study, we doing choir rehearsal, we got prayers to go to, we going, and then we go into service on Sunday, and sometimes service on Sunday it'd be two of them. You know what I mean? We got a revival in the evening time and all that, you know. So it's like I'm up in the church. I'm 8 years old or something like this, you know what I mean? And just loving it. I want to be in the church all the time. And we get to sing a lot of the time, and there's food a lot of the time, and I get to hug all these old ladies, and they keep giving me candy and shit. Like it's great. It's a beautiful situation. I love being up in that church and singing up in that church. And so I got good at, and then you know, I had a little tape recorder also that had a little microphone that would go with it. And so I used to, as a child, be able to like put on you could press play on the tape and then sing along with the tape. It was a I've never seen a machine like this since then, but it was great. It was like a little karaoke machine just for me. And so I got real into doing that. And shout out to Kirk Franklin and Fred Hammond and all that. It was before my relationship to Fred Hampton. It was a different time. But Fred Hammond and Kirk Franklin and God's Property and all that, you know what I mean? I was like up in there doing that music thing. And that was really where I found God that first time, was this understanding of like the feeling of being connected and singing together was a transcendent experience. It was something that was damn near psychedelic for me in that moment in my time, in my timeline. Also, the church is not merely a spiritual vehicle, but also a vehicle of lineage and history as well. So I'm like in this church with a bunch of Black people, and there is a memory in the Black church of Jim Crow and segregation and slavery before that. And so I came up in this place that was steeped in that situation where we like understood that there's a road to freedom, and Freedom Land is as much a mind space and a spiritual, a psycho-spiritual, emotional space as anything else is. And so as it is real, it is as much a mindset as it is a thing in life. So there's an understanding there, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of, I used to like read the Bible for fun because I would be kind of bored during, sometimes there'd be long prayers or sermons and this kind of thing. And, I'm like a child, and so I'm kind of bored. And so I would just read the Bible, and, I got really into Exodus and especially like Old Testament stories. Like really liked seeing what was going on there. And so this idea of like the road to freedom, the road out of slavery, and that kind of thing is like deeply entrenched in the church and my understanding of the church and the way that I was sort of like raised in that space. So that was really important to me. Also, around the same time, that was like when I started really paying attention to. That was the first time that I read a narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, which is his first autobiography, his first most approachable, smallest, slimmest, and easiest autobiography, a narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. I read that in fifth grade the first time, and so this is that same period where I'm like deeply wrapped up in the church, and then. There is also in this space, so it's not just music and it's not just lineage and like historical lineage, but it's also this sense of like stories as teachings, the idea of parables, like this idea that like you can tell a story, and then that story has a kind of resonance across time that matters in some kind of way. And so we would tell Bible stories this way, we'd tell Old Testament stories, we'd tell New Testament stories, tell Jesus stories, also tell stories like slave narratives and stuff like this. And this idea of like a story contains in it important spiritual knowledge was imparted onto me at a young age. And so that was really, really important to me. And I didn't even realize what I was learning at that moment, between the music and parables as pedagogy, like between those two things. And then also the feeling of family and like historical lineage and all that stuff. That was like so deeply important to me. And I was also like, I was never the kind of kid who was like getting into a lot of trouble. You know what I mean? Like I was a good kid. I was trying to hang out in the church all the time. So that was a space that was, they would like pat me on the head and all that, and I would like feel so good about that. And so that was a space where that's where the roots are. And you can notice this immediately, like if you listen to any of my music, if you listen to Thank You, for example, then it's like all church music up in there. And anybody, like I do R&B and soul and stuff like that. And anybody who's nice with R&B and soul definitely has roots in the church, from D'Angelo and Erykah Badu back through Parliament Funkadelic and on, James Brown, et cetera, et cetera. Like we all have roots in the church, and so I have my roots in that same place, and so that is, even though, and so that's a kind of an aspect that makes me into a black person because I was in that space and around that all the time. Now, there did come a time when we moved and we changed, changed the relationship to just like the proximal, the distance relationship to the church. And so we started going to a different church and started hanging out in a different place. Like we started going to church with white folks, and it just didn't resonate in the same kind of way. And I stopped caring about church. Now, at that same time, I was going through kind of a political awakening as well. And so, I stopped really resonating because they started, especially in those white churches, they would like really, they would go hard on, like they really loved W. And they were, it was political in a way that didn't really resonate with where I was. And I was in a space, we're getting up to high school at this point. So I'm in this place where I'm like, ready to rebel and ready to like not do the things that I have been indoctrinated toward, right? That kind of thing. And not really like, not feeling the church very much. And then going through family dynamics. My parents are divorcing, and it's like, the church doesn't seem super helpful or supportive throughout that. And so, not really feeling like I wanted to be in that space anymore. And then also hanging out with like white hippie kids who are, really interested in radicalism and interested in, left wing socialist, anarchist kind of ideals and this kind of thing. I start, at this point, I read a Daniel Quinn book called Ishmael, which I haven't read since then, or I haven't read in a long time, rather. And I think I'm probably going to leave it on the shelf. I don't know that it will really hold up, but it did encourage me to ask questions in a way that was uncomfortable to the churchy types that I was starting to move away from. I started to ask questions that they didn't really like. And I saw that there was something important about asking those questions. And so it didn't really, so it came time for me to break with the faith that I had had up to that point. So once I start doing that, then I'm like hanging out with these white hippie kids who are, sort of influencing the way that I'm thinking about stuff. And, I started to paint my nails on a regular basis, and I started smoking weed, and I started like really leaning into the kind of like artistic lifestyle and this kind of thing. And my dad was not feeling that shit. He was not excited to see my nails painted. It turned like, I don't know if he thought I was gay or something. Like, I'm not. I know I like seem like I should be or something like that, but like I'm not. It's not. It's never been about that for me. I just wanted to have purple nails because my hands are beautiful and they look good with nail polish on them. And so, but I was kind of like, so I broke with my family. And so my mom had already kind of left me as a child. She bounced when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old or something like that. And so I was already living with a single father. And he was really going through it. He was like dealing with this divorce, and it was really ugly and difficult for him. And so and he was like getting more religious in that moment. And then I start wilding out, start doing drugs and painting my nails and shit like that. So he and I broke also. And so then it was time for me to go away to college. So I went away to college, and he and I are having this kind of like ideological break. And he's like, if you are gonna do all these things, then I'm not gonna pay for your college. And I was like, ain't nobody ever asked you to pay for my college. Bye. And so I just kind of left him. And I did, in fact, pay for all of my own college, with I'm still paying on that. but um, but I didn't ask for help, for his help specifically during that time. And so it's just kind of all me. And so I end up hanging out with a bunch of like anarcho queer punk types, other kids who sort of end up homeless because they've broken with their families or this kind of thing. And so I had lived in a punk house for a while and hung out in that space and was like sort of deeply involved in the anarchist space at that time, and because of that, then I was going through this time where, so it never really felt right to me, but in the anarcho punk space, it is explicit because of the trouble with church, with like tradition, traditional religion, around like sex stuff for the most part, then and gender ideology and this kind of thing. Like the sense that there can be more than to the like simple binary operation and that sort of stuff leaves a lot of people you know leaving the church, or maybe they've been mistreated in the church or this kind of thing, right? And so it is, that kind of space is explicitly materialist and atheist. Like it doesn't even have any kind of resonance with the idea of a greater situation, or like spirituality in general is shunned in that space. And so I was in that space and never really comfortable with not having any kind of spirituality, but I didn't know what was appropriate, like what a good kind of spirituality would be. And I also had my own qualms with the church. And so, and I was around this time, I got really into Vine Deloria Jr., who is this Indian author, Native American author. And he spent a whole book in God is Red trashing Christianity and Judaism in favor of the old religion. And the old religion is what they call the traditional indigenous religion, whatever that am. We'll get to that maybe a little bit later. But so I was really into that and, ready to trash the church. And my friends were really ready to trash the church, but I wasn't ready to be full materialist atheist. It just like felt empty and didn't feel true to me. And I just sort of lived in that limbo for a while because I wanted to I wanted to like get, yeah, I just didn't know how to deal with it. I didn't want to give up spirituality, but I didn't want to like discriminate against gay people. So like, what am I supposed to do here? And so I chose the materialist atheism, and continued to play music throughout this time. And so really where I continued to find God or spirituality is in P-Funk, in Parliament Funkadelic, which, so Parliament Funkadelic is, like all forms of black music, black American music, is rooted in the church. And so it was already something that I could like understand, that it spoke to my character, my sense of self, and my sense of identity and lineage and all that sort of stuff. And literally, like, so I picked up the bass. I had a band called Thunderclap Douglas and the 8-Track Groove when I was in, it was like fucking, no, we also had Uncle Vernon's Red Mountain Groove Quartet. That was the name of that group before then. So it was this like, so I had this band and I was supposed to sing in this band, and then the bass player never showed up, and he clearly wasn't practicing at home because he would leave his bass and his amp at the space where we would practice. And so I just picked the bass up because we needed a bass player, and I got pretty good at it. And so I picked the bass up in this moment, and then my uncle gave me a stack of records. He gave me a whole bunch of classics. It was like Brothers Johnson in there, and Herbie Hancock with the Headhunters joint was in there, and a whole bunch of Bootsy and Parliament Funkadelic, probably 8 or 9 between Bootsy and P-Funk. It was probably 9 records or something like that. And they're all huge with the artwork and they all open up and with this, aliens in there and all this. And, it's like a whole cosmological experience. The whole shit is super psychedelic. And I'm starting to like experiment with psychedelic drugs at this point, like take a mushroom or two every once in a while or take some LSD or something like that and listen to these albums and just have these like super transcendent experiences that are explicitly rooted in the church. Like there's a Parliament song, the swing down sweet chariot stop and let me ride, like, which is literally a spiritual. So so I found, and then, so I'm also really into like sci-fi and Afrofuturism and stuff during this time. And so the idea of aliens coming to the earth and bringing the funk to the people is like very exciting to me. That feels really real and really resonant to me in some kind of real way. And so my spirituality, for the most part, landed in P-Funk during this time. Like I just this idea of like being able to funk around so hard where it's like, it maintains the sexual freedom that I was looking for when I didn't want to discriminate against gays and all that sort of stuff. And like, straights can have fun sex stuff too. And then, you know, and then also the idea of the funk being so cold. Oh my God, it is so tough. And then like having a whole creation mythology that like goes back, the secrets of the pyramids and the like this idea of like African origin of people and all this kind of thing. Um, like that all felt really, really true to me. So I got in there, and the interesting about it, an interesting thing about P Funk is that one thing that I say about it sometimes is that the funk is so hard it's criminal. Like the funk, the feeling of funk and music is so tough that it's criminal. Like it should be outlawed. And the thing is, P Funk are some criminal ass people. You know what I mean? Like I had the opportunity to play with P Funk a little bit later once I moved to New York and got involved with P Funk, and I played with them a couple of times. And like I just couldn't keep up. Like it is a shady institution. P Funk is a shady institution. Everybody knows this. I'm not telling anybody's beef or anybody's business and nothing like that. You could find plenty documentaries on all of the drugs and the weird money stuff that went down during P Funk, in its height and all that. So, and I just got involved for the music, and like I'm not really like a criminal like that, like I like sold some drugs or whatever, but like was never really good at it. And it's never what I really wanted to do. I was just like smoking a bunch of weed, and so was involved with it. But I got to a point where I was like, I look like I am selling weed. I should stop selling weed. These cops are gonna find me. So I stopped. And I knew it was gonna like fuck up my scholarships and shit like that if that happened. So I just like it wasn't worth it to me. But so I was never really like a real criminal in the way that like P Funk is involved with criminality. But something about that really like excited me. You know what I mean? Like this idea of a spirituality that is true and real and hits that parable space. This idea of like story as something that is exciting and true and also fictitious. Like, the funk is so hard it's criminal, or the truth is so real that it is fictitious. Like this like loop of things like going to the edge and then coming back around, like that sort of shit like really turned me on. And so I a lot of my spiritual experience was sort of wrapped up in the mothership for a while, where I just like I just got really into that and learned to play the bass super hard and spent a bunch of time sort of delving into the P-Funk cosmos, or the P-Funk approach to the cosmos. The idea of cosmic slop, like cosmic slop is the funk from which, like the funk, the like stinky, smelly, gross, like swamp, grossness, all of that. Funk is the cosmic slop from which the world is created. And that idea resonates to me even now, like this idea that there is something gross and funky and delightful all at the same time, and that grows into a whole world that we currently live in. That was so exciting to me. And so I got really into that, especially in the absence of spirituality or a religion that like made genuine sense to me. So I got really into that and had a couple of bands. I started the Funky Funky Freaks and in the image of P-Funk, and like performed in a skirt a bunch of times, and like was wilding. We threw some great house parties. The house parties were real dope. And then I moved to New York, and I have already told the story of how I accidentally moved to New York. That is available on the podcast, I think episode 17, something like that. But so I ended up in New York on accident, and there I started playing with P-Funk and played with them a couple of times, and started playing with I was living in Bed-Stuy in a West Indian neighborhood, and got involved with a bunch of Jamaicans and Trinidadians, playing reggae music and this kind of thing. And also, while I was there in New York, I got involved in Chinese medicine and acupuncture and herbalism. So I was, I had been working in a restaurant for a while and just like couldn't get a good restaurant gig. I speak Spanish, and so I found that my ability to speak Spanish, which I thought was going to like put me ahead in the job market, was instead keeping me in back of house, which was it just like it stunted my ability to make real front of house money. So I had to get out of that. And at that time, my girlfriend was going through some eczema stuff, and so she started using acupuncture to treat that. There was a work exchange program at the acupuncture clinic that she was doing, or yeah, that she did, and she ended up like working for them and like managing that clinic and stuff. But I got in there also on a volunteer work exchange thing, and then got involved with an acupuncturist there. So that lady immediately recognized me as her kin. She is around, like, she's old enough to be my mom. I think of her as an auntie. And she just immediately started taking care of me. And then I got arrested on some bullshit. I tried to steal some shoes for my restaurant job, and got caught stealing the shoes, and so I had to like spend a little time in jail or whatever. And she saw what was going on, and she like pulled me out of that situation and got me a job at her bougie acupuncture clinic in Chelsea. So I went and worked there at the front desk for a long time and managed it. I ended up getting to a point where I was in middle management at that clinic, and running the schedule and running the, we were transitioning, office software and this kind of thing. And so I was like doing all that kind of stuff and selling products and, like organizing the space and all that sort of stuff. Right. So that meant that I was hanging out with people who did Chinese medicine, tough, hanging out with them all the time. And so learning about Chinese medicine and ways of conceptualizing the human body, and the human body as a fractal layer of the wider creative cosmos, right? The earth and whatever else is beyond that, the Tao and all of that, right? So like this idea of human as microcosm for the wider world. And one of the things that I really loved about Chinese medicine is that it's a flow model rather than a lot of Western biomedicine sort of understands the discrete organs and organ systems that are sort of static entities that interact with one another from time to time. Instead of doing that, the idea in Chinese medicine is that it's all qi and it's all flowing. And so what you want is things to flow in proper proportion at the right times. And so when things get stuck and they're not flowing properly, then that is like the primary cause. That's the primary thing that goes wrong. And so what you want is flow to be happening. You don't want stuff to build up in the one spot, and you don't want things to get too weak in a spot, but you want things to flow. And so I really fell in love with this idea of flow as the model of life. At that same time, I took a course in traditional Western herbalism from the Arbor Vitae School of Traditional Western Herbalism with Claudia Kiel and Richard Mandelbaum. I interviewed Richard a couple of times for the podcast. He's really brilliant. I really love hanging out with him and talking with him. Learned so much from him specifically. And one of the things that I think the way that I introduced him the first time on my podcast was that he was the only white person he is one of two white people who I've ever known who thought that reading Marcus Garvey would be worthwhile. That's a very, very high bar. Like just the idea that Marcus Garvey or Frederick Douglass is another one that would be someone worth reading is something that like white folks for the most part just don't do. And so that he had done that was really interesting to me. And so I spent a bunch of time with him in the field, and then outside of that a couple of times. There was one time we went out on a field trip with the whole crew, with the whole cohort of Arbor Vitae people, and he was out sort of like casing the forest just to see what was going on, because we were going to do a plant walk and he wanted to be able to show people where we were going to go and stuff. And so I went with him and just watched him interact with the trees in the forest. I just watched him move around and be in the space and tried to learn how to be in forest same way that he was doing. And really that trip in particular. So I had been learning about, that was at the end of the year. I only took 1 year. So that's a 3-year program. So I'm not like certified. Arbor Vitae did not, I didn't graduate. I didn't even graduate from that first year, if I'm being real. I didn't do my homework and did a bunch of music stuff instead, but did attend all the lectures and that kind of thing. But so I had been learning in that class about plants being used as medicine. But it was on that trip where I was out there with him, and then there was a time also where I was listening to the birds sing the sun up, and spent some time quietly in the woods out there, and stopped thinking of plants as resource and started thinking of plants as friends, plants as people, plants as someone. And that fundamentally changed my orientation in the world. So that at the same time that I was sort of engaged in Chinese medical ideology, the sense of like a flow model, stuff like moving from here to there, and the motion is what is most important. And then the human as microcosm of the wider macrocosm and cosmos. Like the interconnection of all of that turned into plants as friends and land as person in a way that resonated strongly with me, and that I could fuck with it. You know what I mean? I was like, oh yeah, this is like hitting, and I can learn something from this. Also at this time, then things start getting real psychedelic for me. I started using acid on a real regular basis. Probably, there were a couple of years there where I was probably eating acid 200 days out of the year or something like that, like a whole bunch. I don't necessarily recommend doing that. It's just what I did. It was quite a lot. It was quite a lot of, and for me, that was really good for opening my mind up. And just the way that I frequently describe it is like this: imagine that you're looking at a globe and you can see what you can see on the globe, and then you just turn it a little bit. And so now you can see some stuff on this side that you couldn't see before, and you can't see some of the stuff that you used to be able to see. And so it provides this new perspective on what the world is. And then you finish, and then the world turns back, or the globe turns back, and you like go back to your image of the world as it was, and you get an idea for what you used to be able to see on that other side when things were all psychedelic, right? And so that was something that was really useful to me. And that at the same time that I was doing, so I'm still playing music super tough at this point. I'm like involved with P-Funk, and I'm playing all this reggae music and stuff like this. And the music is still speaking to me deeply. And that, as well as being involved with psychedelics and stuff, like one of the reasons why I loved acid so much is because it gave me some like nervous energy. And so I would have these late night gigs, we would start playing at 11 p.m. or something like that and go to 1 or something, and then take the train back and arrive back at the crib at like 4:30 in the morning or something like that, right? And so I found that weed and alcohol I would get real slumbery, real earlier than I needed, because I tend toward sunrise. I prefer sunrise as like a lifestyle. I really love like I mentioned before, the birds singing the sun up. Like that's one of my favorite things. I have this idea that birds believe that it is their duty to make the sun rise. Like it is such an important ceremony to them. They get up faithfully every single morning, and they sing until the sun comes up. And then they stop singing after the sun comes up, like shortly after the sun comes up. There's a moment in the daytime when there is a certain amount of quiet, and it's because the birds have done their job. So that like ceremony always felt really real to me. And so I really prefer sunrise time. And so doing late night things would be difficult for me. And so I would do some acid, and then that would give me enough nervous energy to be able to like continue what I'm doing and play this music and everything. And then also lots of times I would be like tripping my fucking face off in the middle of some performance. And then at the end of it, everybody would be like, yo, you played your ass off, dog. Yeah, well, good job. You know what I mean? Like, people who were better musicians than me would be impressed with my performance, and I was like, okay, let me do this more. So, and then this is like microdosing is getting more and more sort of popular in the zeitgeist, and then so I would have these times would be like, okay, I'm gonna just microdose, and then acid like comes in a small sheet of paper in the first place, and so you like try to cut off like the teeniest corner of it, and then like take that and then be like, well, that wasn't a microdose, but I'm still at my job, so I'm gonna do my job now. So I had a bunch of time like that. So a few things happened. One was I got really involved in the art during that time. I was able to examine that other perspective and really spend time in that space. And then also, so New York City is like a very liminal kind of place. People talk about the ports, or the places between worlds, like the portals or doorways. And New York is a port city, right? It's like it's an island with rivers, and like it's a hub where there's all this like exchange, commerce, stuff comes in, stuff goes out. And so it's a very liminal kind of space. And then there's trains that go underground, and it's just like real steeped in some weird spiritual stuff goes on there. And so, because I was spending so much time on these underground trains while tripping, then stuff would get real weird, real surreal. You know what I mean? And so, what I developed during that time was an ability to go with that. Like one of my superpowers, I always say, is like I can keep calm when things are getting weird, when things are surreal. then I'm just like, all right, it's gonna be weird for a little while. But that's what we're doing. I'm just gonna roll with it. It's gonna be weird, and that has saved me a lot of times from like freaking out during trips or and then now in like my life is far less psychedelic now. But when things start to get weird, I'm good at keeping my cool. I'm good at staying chill and level through that because in in large part because I have experience with things getting super weird and just like sort of staying the course with that. So with that, and then like, my head is so open and like things are like really getting weird and I'm aware that weirdness is a real thing in the world, then I sort of am working with the flow model of Chinese medicine and also the funk model of the world. And there is, like, so all of this is sort of starting to congeal a little bit for me. Then, all right, so I got tired of my middle management job. So I had a job, managing this acupuncture clinic, and it was really good for me. And I got to work with my auntie, and like I made some deep and lasting relationships in that space. But I was also in middle management. I was like deeply invested in the space and in the clinic, but I didn't have any real authority about what would happen. And so I spent all this time and effort and energy in this space and then just like couldn't really get it to, I just, it didn't, stuff wasn't, it didn't feel good to me. And so my cousin, who has always been, I've always looked up to her. I like thought that she was the coolest from all time. She is the reason why I have dreadlocks and nose rings because I just wanted to be as cool as Robbie is. Like that's all I wanted. I just wanted to be cool like she was. And so, one of the things that she did is she lived in California and she went across the world to the West. So she just went from California to Asia and then traveled across Asia and then traveled across North or Europe and then traveled across North Africa and then continued to go west and then found herself in New York City, which is where I was. We rapped for a little while and then she continued west until she got to California again. She just went across the whole world and just traveled this way. Again, my cousin is the fucking coolest and I just wanted to be like her. So we reconnected a little bit. She's, I don't know, 15 years older than me or something like that. So older enough than me to be older and wiser, but younger enough that she doesn't feel like she's a whole generation up. She doesn't feel like stodgy in the way that your mom and them can sometimes feel that way. And so she was someone who I really looked up to, and we reconnected. And then, like a month later, 2 months later, or something like that, she called me and she was like, "Hey, do you want to come out to California and work on this ganja farm with me and trim buds?" And I was like, "Fucking yes, yes, that's exactly what I want." And so I went out to California. So we're out there, and okay, before that happened, I was going through a tough time with my lady, and Channing Nicholas was like all in the zeitgeist in that moment. She was on her come up in that moment, and she was writing these horoscopes that everybody in New York was talking about, and so I was reading those and she was reading those, and I was skeptical about astrology, but I'm more and more in the holistic health space, and astrology like it has a hold in the like crystal hippie space. And so I was like in there and checking it out, not sure what's really real here, but like reading them because everybody's talking about it, and I want to be down with these girls, like if we're being real about it. Then so and what I noticed was that my girlfriend is a Gemini and I'm Scorpio. And so these are very different. These are quincunx to each other, so they don't. You're not going to get any of the same stuff going on. And so I would read my horoscopes, and she would read her horoscopes and my horoscopes, and I found that she became livid when reading my horoscope. I think she was reading it as hers was bad and mine was good. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what was going on during that time, but I could see that something was happening, and I was like, "Oh, okay, this is like interesting. I should learn something about this." And so she and I split, and I went to a different house, and my new roommate had a purple wall in his house, and on that wall was a bookshelf, and on that bookshelf was a purple book called "The Only Astrology Book You'll Ever Need." I love purple things. And this is such a compelling title that I was like, okay, well, let's check it out. Let's see what's going on. So I read this book, and I do not think that it's the only astrology book you'll ever need, but it did give me a good outline of what astrology is, like how, so if you say that the sun is in Aries, what does that mean? You know what I mean? It gave me a good idea of like, okay, so Aries is a constellation, and sun moves around and whatever, right? Like all that sort of stuff. I learned about what is even being said. And so I like developed a sort of like rudimentary understanding of astrology. Then my cousin calls me and is like, yo, do you want to go work on this ganja farm? And I do want to go work on this ganja farm. So I go out there, quit my job in New York, because this is going to be like several $1,000s in cash. It's going to be great. And so I go, and my idea is that I'm going to come back to New York, and I'm going to like make an album with the money that I have made doing this. And so I go out to California, and so the thing about that job is that it is pretty labor intensive, and you get paid by weight, not by time. So you get paid for the amount that you accomplish, the amount that you finish. So there's a great incentive to sit your ass in this chair and trim these buds, right? Because there's only so many buds. We work on a farm. There's this much weed to trim. And so this much money is gonna go out to people, and so you're kind of in competition with each other. And so there's a lot of incentive to sit at the table and don't move around, don't do other things, just sit at the table and trim. And so I had a lot of time to listen to podcasts and lectures and stuff like this. And so this is when I got introduced to Chris Brennan and Austin Coppock. And them most specifically because they were the ones who showed me that astrology is not just some crystal hippie Cosmo magazine fluff stuff, but rather like these are dudes who read ancient Greek and who are like real tough scholars and talking about ancient lore and dragons and stuff. And this is at the same time that the Great American Eclipse is happening. And so people are talking about there's this like major celestial event that's taking place at this moment. And so it's like a real big deal. And so I am learning astrology I'm like going deep on this astrology rabbit hole. I also get sick during this time. And so I start having these terrible asthma attacks. I just can't. So I was diagnosed with asthma as a child, and then it wasn't really a big deal through when I moved to New York. I think that it was like a pollen allergen kind of situation. It was not a big deal in New York. And then I went to California unprepared and started having these asthma attacks, and like just didn't have anything. And so I was like dying. Literally, there were a couple of nights where I was like, this might be it. This might be my last night. I might not survive this night because I can't fucking breathe. So there was a few, and we're in the woods far away from hospitals or anything like that. So I was going through that. And so I had to stop working so much, especially since it's like a very dusty environment and there's like resin everywhere. It's like not nice on the lungs, and very, very much encouraged to smoke a bunch of weed during this time. Like there's more weed around than you can possibly imagine. Like I have this memory of, there was a laundry room, and so there's a washer and dryer, and I can't even get to the washer and dryer because the rest of the room is filled with trash bags full of weed. And I'm like trying to like move the shit out so I can just like wash my fucking clothes, like the whole bunch of weed around. easy to smoke, and smoking is bad for my lungs. And so I gotta like take some time off and get away for a little while. So before we had left, I spent a couple of nights at my cousin's place, and she had a pile of books in her living room. And one of those books was Octavia Butler's Adulthood Rights. And so I had read this book before. I read Lilith's Brood. Like, I've been really interested in sci-fi and Afrofuturism for quite some time. And so I had read Lilith's Brood, which is the whole series. And Adulthood Rights, the second book in the series, had really, really resonated with me. Like, it felt like it was really true in a way that, like, even to this day, like, breaks my heart. It is like so tragically true to my life that I feel very much like that book is written about me. And so I saw that book in her living room and just grabbed it, just like, okay, sure, whatever. And then didn't have time to read it because I was like trimming all the time, and you need your eyes to trim, and so you can't really read at the same time you listen to stuff. But I just had to take some time off. And so I started reading. I started going out to there was a like river creek situation nearby. And so went and sat and read about this like new kind of creature, this new like alien human hybrid that was a different and special kind of thing that was like coming to the world and was like changing the world and adapting to a world that had been changed already. And I was just like, oh man, this is like really resonating. This is really hitting really hard. And then like, what do I do with that? How do I live with this? And it got to a point where I'm like having this health crisis, right? So I'm like near death on a regular basis, and I'm going through this like super intense fictional story that is really speaking to my heart. And it was a really intense time, and I really thought I was going to die. And so my cousin, her mom, my auntie, she was putting on a family reunion. And so it had not been my plan to go to the family reunion, but I needed a ride out of town. And because her mom was putting it on, she didn't have the choice to not go. And so I just got on the train and left the camp, and went to Kansas, where I've got a bunch of family. And so I went to this family reunion and sort of like nursed myself and my body back to health, and kind of, so I couldn't immediately go back to New York City. I wanted to go back to New York, but I couldn't do that because I had a subletter in my room. And so I couldn't go back. And so I had 5 or 6 months that I just had to kill. And so I ended up like kind of bouncing around from this relative to that relative's place. And so I stayed at my brother's house for a while, and me and his wife have always butted heads. We just like don't get along very well. She didn't like me being in her house. I didn't like being in her house. So they kind of kicked me out. And so my mom's brother he had a cancer diagnosis at that time. It was his third round with cancer. And so I ended up, so he was living in a cabin in the woods. And I was just like, yo, do you need help? Do you need somebody, like a young man, to come and carry things and stuff for you? Cabin living is pretty difficult living in the first place, and you've got cancer. Do you need help? And he was like, yeah, that would be cool. And so I went out there and I lived with him for a while. And he is an interesting figure because, so that's my mom's older brother, and Smokey is his name. And he was a professor at Haskell University at the time, which Haskell is basically an HBCU for Indians in Lawrence, Kansas. So he was teaching there, and actually now he even has they've named a building after him because of his contribution to the community and to the institution. Pretty cool. But so I was out there and working on so I was working on just like helping him to live, but then also he introduced me to a bunch of like Indian lore that I had been kind of familiar with, but he was always considered Indian in a way that I wasn't, but not only because I didn't reach the blood quantum, but also because I'm black and that side of the family didn't really like me that much. They sort of like ejected me as a child. Like my mom called her mom to tell her that she had a new grandson, and my grandma said, "Is that all?" and then hung the phone up. Like, ooh, you know what I mean? So and so I went back into that space and hung out with my uncle, who is probably the only relative who I feel like I look like. And so it's like it was cool to hang out with him. And he always like the reason why my parents met is because my dad was friends with him and then hooked up with his sister. And so like he was always like kind of more down for me than a lot of the rest of the family was. And so he was happy to have me along and to have somebody to tell stories to. And, he's like kind of getting to be an old dude and he's like looking death in the eye and this kind of thing. And so he wants to pass down lore and this kind of stuff. And so ended up hanging out with him a fair amount and learn. And he also took me around to like grave sites and, like made sure that I was like kind of steeped in the Indian lineage, which was interesting. That was the first time that I had been really deeply exposed to that. We had a couple of like Potawatomi words growing up, like we would say things like Pamamina Nanimwa, which is like the same as see you later alligator, just in Potawatomi. It's a coyote and not an alligator, but same kind of concept. We'd have stuff like that, but nothing really deep where he's like, it's late at night and, fire and telling stories, telling, tales and stuff like that. Not just family tales, but also like, mythological tales and stuff like that, like getting really into that kind of thing. Got into that while I was there, became aware of the animal ancestry that I have and things like that, And so I reconnect with those folks, that community. And then it comes time for me to leave and go back to New York. And so so one of the things that I am aware that is going to be rough for me when I go back to New York is a concrete jungle. And I very much like hanging out in the woods. And so there's a bunch of nice woods out here and like a trail that goes through them. And so I was biking forward and back and forward and back on this trail, just like kind of tiring myself out. And like the juniper trees had been good friends to me during this time. And this went past a grove of juniper trees. There was a grove of juniper trees on my uncle's property also, where I did a bunch of ceremony and like, they were good friends to me. They were good friends and ancestors for me, or elders really. And so I was hanging out with these junipers and like biking back and forth and back a few times. And then on the last one, I was like, all right, I really gotta, like, this is it. I gotta, like, it was my last out before I came back. And on that one, then a hawk came soaring out of the skies. And so when I mentioned that I am descended from some animals, hawks and eagles are in my ancestry. And so we went together, just like I'm on the trail and the hawk is above me for probably 1.5 miles, 2 miles or something like that. And then I got to the spot where it was time for me to turn around so I could come back. And then I stopped, and then the hawk turned around and came back and just sat in the air, stationary in the air above me for an absurd period of time. We're talking about like 4 or 5 minutes, just me like gobsmacked looking at this hawk, and this hawk just like sitting stationary and silent above me, just immediately directly above me. And then we get to a point where it's like, okay, I'm leaving now, and I like do my little salute, and the hawk turns around and keeps it moving. And what I took away from that was that the ancestors had seen me and they were like, you did good, kid, and then sent me off. And so I went back to New York, went back to New York after that and had a new idea about you know, who I was and what really was going on in the world, like kind of a renewed sense of spirituality in that moment. I remember having a feeling throughout that whole voyage that something special was happening and that I was being guided in a way that there were even times when I was like concerned, like there we would be concerned about safety, you know, like weather would be happening and we're out driving and this kind of thing. And I just remember having this feeling of like I am in the right place right now and I'm not concerned about my safety. It's going to be okay. I had like a strong sense of that. So that was really interesting. So then I moved back to New York City, back in New York, and so I made significantly less money than I thought I was going to make. My plan was to make, you know, $12,000, $15,000 trimming all these buds. I didn't make that much money. And so I had to figure out what I was going to do. But I also knew that I didn't want to go back to working a middle management job for a company that wasn't mine. So I was like, okay, so how am I going to do this? And I hooked up with a friend of mine who we were in the same cohort at Arbor Vitae, the School of Traditional Western Herbalism. And she was working at an herb shop, got a super bougie herb shop in the East Village, and got me a job there as well. So I started working there 2 days a week. 2 days is a number of days that I can do. I can do 2 days and then have 5 days to do my own thing and build my own situation and all of that. And like that felt like it was going to really work for me. And so I did that and they kept trying to get me to work more and they kept trying to like get me to manage the place and all this. And I just wasn't doing it. I was competent. I was gonna be able to do that work. And I just wasn't willing to because I knew that I had to do this other stuff. But while I was there, I got involved with Sanctuary. So Sanctuary was a nascent app in that moment, and it's an astrology app, and I do readings on there. And so they had an event at this herb shop, and I was like, "Hey, do you guys need readers?" And they were like, "Oh my God, we need readers!" And so I started doing readings on this app, and you know, they would be 5, 10, 15-minute readings. And so it was a good way for me to start knocking readings out because so when I got back to New York, then I started hanging out with Kira from the astrology. I think her website is kira.world now instead of the astrology, but but it was the astrology at the time, and so we were hanging out, and she used to have these great parties where we would just hang out and smoke a bunch of weed and talk a bunch of shit about astrology. So it was a lot of fun, and so we did that. And so I'm there hanging out, and I'm like looking over somebody's chart or whatever, and she like pulls me off to the side, and she's like, "Yo, like, why don't you do this for real? Like, you should be giving readings." And I was like, "Where? For real?" And so I started doing astrology readings, and then Sanctuary came into the herb shop, and I was like, "Hey, let me get some readings." And they were like, "Yes, please do that." So at this period of time, I started deciding that like I really wanted to do astrology for real. I wanted to get good at astrology, and I heard about Malcolm Gladwell's concept of 10,000 hours makes a master. And I was like, okay, what I need to do is I need to read 10,000 astrology charts in order to like get some basic mastery of the situation. And so I started doing a daily forecast during that time where I would just look at what was going on in the heavens and write a little paragraph about it and post that to Instagram. And then that turned into a situation where I noticed that I had a bunch of beautiful artwork that I had seen around the city. I like, you know, that's one of the best things about living in New York City is the art scene. And there's art just on the street everywhere. You know, there'd be stickers around or murals around or discarded art, discarded canvases around. And just like the art scene is crazy in New York. So there's just so much art all over the place. And my phone was overflowing with pictures that I had taken around town. And so what I started doing was like link my daily forecast with a piece of art. So I would illustrate it with some art that I had found around the city. And so I started putting those things together, and it always like makes my heart sing a little bit, like the some of the like heavy New York heads. And you can still see some of them on my page today. The Coney Denizen comments on the dailies almost every day now. And she's a OG New Yorker. She's been living in New York City for like 65 years or something like that. And she and a couple of her friends said that it was one of the best street art galleries in all of New York City. And so I like feel really good about that. But so I would do that, and my goal was to hit 10,000 readings. And so if nothing else happened, if I didn't get any readings through my website, or if I didn't get any readings at the herb shop or anything like that, then at least if I do my dailies, then I'm getting 365, or realistically closer to maybe 350 readings in a year, you know? And so I'm doing it on this regular basis, and just like keep on doing these readings, doing readings every day, and then get involved with Sanctuary, and my readings volume goes up a lot. And so the whole thing is like I'm trying to hit 10,000. And I did actually hit 10,000 last February. So February 2024, I hit that mark. And I would not call myself a master, but I would say that after 10,000 readings, I am well competent at the craft. I can do astrology readings effectively. I do a good job with them. And so, and that's like, you know, when I was doing especially sanctuary readings, because sanctuary readings, you're texting with someone who can't see you, and you know, they've only got 10 minutes or something. And so I would spend a little time sort of delineating the mathematical astrology of it. You know, it'd be like, oh, you've got the sun in Aries getting a square from Mars in Cancer right now. And people would be like, okay, what does that mean? You know, like that was the very first thing that people would say. And so that put me in a headspace of like, okay, I need to make meaning in a minute or less. Like I need to be able to look at the astrology and understand what's going on in the moment, and be able to make meaning in this extremely short period of time. And so meaning making has become the primary thing that I'm trying to do. And that's like why I'm involved in this, like I'm trying to create a new kind of spirituality and all of that sort of stuff. It's because I am interested in making meaning for a generation of people who don't have the traditional means of meaning making in the same ways that one might have expected in a historical era. So meaning making becomes the real thing while I am doing all of these readings for Sanctuary and whatnot. Also, the Alchemist Kitchen put me on to weekly forecasts. And so I started doing the weekly forecast through the Alchemist Kitchen, and they put me on. And so I got a bunch of following from that. And so that was really helpful to me. And then in 2020, George Floyd happened. And after George Floyd, then a lot of people started looking at their Instagram feeds or their social media, and started being like, yo, why are the only astrologers I know white women? And so they started like looking to diversify. And I got posted to a couple of like my favorite black astrologer is such and such a person, or like a list, you know? And so I got posted to that a couple of times. And because, so at that point, I had been doing daily readings for 3 years already, and weekly readings for, I don't know, year and a half, 2 years, something like that. So I had a foundation already. And so when I started getting attention, then I was ready for it. I just like, people were like, oh my God, this page is great. Like this dude is like doing these readings, and they're super resonant, and the art is beautiful, and all that sort of stuff, right? So my page catapults at this moment, just like launch of all launches. And it just like turns in like my shit quadruples in the space of like you know, 2 weeks a week, something like that, something crazy. It was like crazy astronomical numbers that I didn't really understand, but I didn't have to. I just had to continue doing what I was already doing, and it was valuable to people. And so I got in. That's like how I turned into like a legit professional astrologer. Like that's what I do, right? So same time this is happening. So let's rewind a little bit. So we're like late 2017. I finally get back from Kansas. I'm back in New York, and my friend, a woman who I love very deeply, put me on to. She had been out. She had gone to Costa Rica for a while and spent a little time and drank some ayahuasca and came back kind of changed and was like, "Yo, you got to do this. You are going to learn from this." And so her like shaman teacher dude showed up in New York, and so she brought me to a ceremony, and I like hung out there and drank some medicine, and I before it started, I asked the spirit of the vine to speak to me in a language that I could understand. And so I went through a challenging night where it was, it was pretty uncomfortable and there was a lot of weird stuff. And like, I'm used to psychedelics at this point, so I'm ready for a psychedelic situation, but ayahuasca is a pretty uncomfortable time for the most part. And so I started thinking about like justice and doing good in the world and how difficult it is to do good in the world and how difficult it is to do the right thing. And I was like, man, this is some bullshit. Like, why is it so difficult to do the right thing? Why is it so difficult to do good in the world? And I asked that question, and the response that the vine gave to me was, nigga, what the fuck else you doing? And I was gobsmacked by that shit. And like, and the truth of it is really like, you know, so what if it's hard? Like this is this is what you're here to do, dog. So, um, so I mentioned that in the morning, and like, because everybody, like, what happens is you like go through this kind of difficult night, and then you survive, and when you make it in the morning, then like there's a kind of euphoria because you made it and your body doesn't hurt anymore, and there's like it just things feel really great, and there's a sense of togetherness and family and community and that kind of thing. And so we're in that space where we've got this family and community and stuff, and we're talking it out, and I mentioned that that had happened, and no one's black in the space, but I use the N word anyway because it was given to me by this vision. And then like the shaman dude who is white, he had to say it himself, and I was like, man, like, oh. And he was like, he realized his overreach and was like, oh shit, I'm so sorry about that, like I would like to give you another night of ceremony. And so I went ahead and accepted and did another night of ceremony. And that second night, my whole shit blew up, and I wasn't really, and it just like kind of threw off my whole game as to like, I came to understand that the world was not as it had been advertised, right? And so there was such a thing as spirit or magic or something that was unseen that had a strong influence in the world. And so that opened a lot of questions. So I finished this um, I finished this ceremony with this understanding that the world is different than it has been described to me. It is not as advertised, and things are going to be different. Magic is a real thing. And so as I started to, like I'm in this moment where astrology is kind of nascent in me and there's like something new that I'm thinking through, then it's like, okay, well, what if astrology is magic by which to know things, is there magic to do stuff too? And it turns out that yes is the answer to that question. And so I started like looking into what that would be and what that might mean. And so I took a class with Austin Coppock about astrological talisman making. And that was really important because that was not a beginner's course in astrology. And so my astrology game had to level up in a real big way simply in order to do that. And I learned a lot about ways of thinking about time, like what time is and how, like the idea of like resonance across time and stuff like that. And so that was really important to me in the way that I could understand what was really going on in the world. And so most important is, so I've already, a few years prior to this, I've got this sense that like plants are friends, plants are community and not resource, right? Then the idea that like, oh, that goes deep, that goes deeper than anything else that I might have thought of. Like that is going to be, that's going to include rivers and mountains, but then there's also going to be an unseen component to what's going on that is like going to be a real big deal. And so how am I going to navigate all of that sort of stuff? So at this point, I get involved with astrological magic, and I'm like just eating up everything that Austin Coppock does, because he's such a great teacher and he's full of really vivid, resonant imagery. And he was making a regular appearance on the Rune Soup podcast, and so I started paying serious attention to Gordon White and them as well. I had a friend in New York who had a premium membership. And so I got with that friend and she gave me her password. And so I started like taking RuneSoup courses and was like, oh, this is really dope. And so I got my own membership and spent a bunch of time in that community with people who were like actively doing magic and like trying to get stuff done. And it was a really interesting time. It was a, like so there's like chaos magic and the idea that like you can make magic from whatever's around, whatever, like the idea of like Mickey Mouse or Superman as spiritual entities or this kind of thing, right? And so it's this idea that like, oh, there's magic in everything, there's magic in the mundane and this kind of stuff, that and making sigils, personal sigils and stuff like this is all like something that you can do to influence your lived life and your lived experience. And so I got involved with a group during that time, which was we were doing Power of Eight intentions on a regular basis. So Power of Eight is, oh, what is that lady's name? I can't think of that lady's name off the top right now, who put it together. Yeah, I'm blanking. I'll have to come back to that. But if you get a group of people together, maybe eight, maybe fewer, it'll work with more. But you get some people together and intend with joy and positivity in your heart for things to heal or grow primarily, then then you can make some miracles happen. And so I got involved with this group where we really were involved in some really amazing miracles a few times. And so I started to be involved in a space where it was almost like a prayer group, right? And so that's how I've sold it a couple of times, is like as a prayer group, but then it like turns into this really tangible benefit in our real lives. And that was something that was deeply influential in how I came to move through a magical practice and a way of being in the world. Okay. I feel myself beginning to wander and ramble a little bit, and so I think I'm going to come back to this at another time. If you've been hanging out with me, thank you so much for hanging out with me on the live, and I look forward to telling the last third, I'll say, at another time, maybe this afternoon or something like that. We'll see. But I appreciate y'all. Check you later. What's up, fam? It's time for part two. Last week I did a little piece here on just like going through how I arrived at the brand of spirituality that I have now. And I ran out of gas because it's kind of a long story. But so we are going to come back and we are going to check out part two here. So thank you so much for being here with me. Appreciate you as always. So I believe I left off in a place where I had just drunk ayahuasca for the first time and became aware that magic was a real thing. And it was kind of terrifying and blew my whole shit up. Wasn't ready for all that. And it changed my perspective. Now, I had already been moving in an animist direction. I had already been sort of thinking into this idea of plants as friends rather than resource. And then as I and I had already at that point started to study astrology seriously. And so this sense of like a wider space of context and meaning in the world had already started to be like burgeoning in me. And that as something that had been continuing alongside this idea of music, right? Like the music is so super important to me in this idea of like timing and things in relationship to one another. Like I always wanted to play the drums because of this idea of like spacing things out in relationship to one another in time was always something that like made a lot of sense to me. And so then to get into the space of you know, like astrology as a cycle of rhythm and timing made perfect sense to me. And then, so drink this psychedelic medicine and notice that there's like spirits going around and be like, oh, okay, so like this is gonna be a lot. There's a lot more going on in the world than I had previously imagined. And so if that's true, then what else is true, right? So I've got this like baseline understanding of how astrology works and stuff like this. And so I started taking a course with my teacher, Austin Coppock, who was one of the first astrologers who I ever knew who was like in deep with the ancient texts and all this kind of thing. Like he was like he was doing the most as far as like rigorous study was concerned. And he had a course that was in making talismans, planetary talismans in Picatrix style. So Picatrix is an 11th century text, which was originally written in Arabic, which was written for King Alfonso X of Spain. And in it, there is this cosmology, there's this way of thinking of the world, which consists of like ever expanding spheres of influence. And we sort of like sit in the middle of that. And then there's like all this other stuff. And then the planetary spheres exist out in the world, right? And so while I'm sort of navigating this idea of like animism, right, the plants as friends kind of situation, then I have this understanding that there might be consciousness, life, or intention that could be distributed throughout the world, throughout the universe in ways that are you know, so in some places there's maybe more mind than in other places, but we might understand that there is mind out in the world somewhere, right? And that because of that, you can petition planets, for example. You can be like, oh, Venus, you're so good at smelling delightful. Would you bring some nice smells and cleanliness my way? And Venus will be like, yeah, that's what's up. Like, move a little bit in that direction, right? That kind of thing. And so, So I took this course with Austin, and it was a deeply rigorous astrology course. Like I learned a lot about astrology by doing these elections because this kind of electional astrology is very deep and intense, and there's so many conditions that you have to pay attention to and all this sort of stuff. And so I started getting into elections at that time, and that's how I started doing the electional report, which is available on Patreon. You can find it every month. I publish a document that's got times that are good for launching your thing or times to avoid in order to avoid a more difficult life of that thing, right? It's sort of like choosing a natal chart for your venture so that like your venture has this kind of life, a life that is shaped like this astrology chart rather than that astrology chart, right? And so I started doing the electional report at that time and started, like getting deeply into electional astrology in order to potentiate the outcomes in my life. Now, Austin Coppock was a regular on the Rune Soup podcast, which was I was a little resistant to Rune Soup for a while because the host seemed a little snooty to me, and was maybe like not exactly the direction. It seemed like it was downstream of Golden Dawn, Crowley type stuff, and that just was never really my speed. But YouTube continued to recommend this to me, and I found that there were some interesting points. There were interesting things were going on there, and I became more and more involved in that community. I eventually decided to get a membership, and they were doing all type of wild magic up in there. They were like, so one of the things that really pushed me into it was this idea that so there was a wildfire in Tasmania, which is where Gordon White, who is the host of Rune Soup, he was living in Tasmania or is living in Tasmania and had a farm there. And there was a wildfire that was headed right for his farm. And so then the community of Rune Soup people conjured a water dragon to bring some rain to that spot, just and so it like saved his farm specifically. It was really interesting the way that there was a specific outcome that they were trying to do, and then they did some magic and then got that outcome, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, this is something that is really worth looking into. Maybe there is some utility in this kind of craft. And so I saw that they had done that, and I signed up for the community and got into the membership and got into he had courses in there, and there was like community stuff to do as well. And so in that space I learned more and more about this idea of like mind being distributed throughout the world and being able to interact with that through prayer, meditation, mantra, sigils, and other image magic. I would consider sigils and Picatrix magic to both be this idea of like creating an image and then using that image to influence the shape of the world around you, right? And so that all really resonated with me, and it all like sort of stacked really well on top of the cosmology that I had already sort of built up for myself. And so I, in that space, I also learned about power of eight intentions. And so this idea here is that if you can get eight people together and intend with love and harmony in your heart, with like a desire for wellness in the world in your heart, and then you get together and you intend for the best outcome, especially growth and healing, then you can create some miracles. And also you can so it was originally developed around healing and growth, like intending for plants to grow better, or for someone to feel better, to get better with their illness or something like this. But then also, so I got involved with Rune Soup, I think it was like late 2019. Yeah, about halfway through 2019. And then it moved into 2020, and 2020 got real crazy and all this. And so in the early part of 2020, so it was probably like February of 2020, then I was in an intention group, probably, I guess, like the longest running intention group in the world or something like this. And so I was like hanging out with these folks who were doing these miracles on a regular basis. And it was my first time in there. And we had what we called the chaos intention at the end. And that was fun because it wasn't, it's easy to think about like somebody getting better from their like throat cancer or something like that. That is like an improvement in the world. But also, like you just getting the things that you want in your life, like moving toward your preferred life or getting more comfortable or delicious things in your life is a good thing for you. And so we made some space to intend for these kinds of things, which feel a little frivolous in the face of somebody's recently amputated leg or something like that. You know what I mean? Like they're going through some shit, and we wanted to intend for things that are just fun as well. And so we did that. So we had a, lottery where we would sort of like randomize some of our requests, and then ultimately we would vote on one. And one that we voted on was the perfect shoes for every occasion. And I was like down for that. So we intended for the perfect shoes for every occasion. And then like 2 days later, somebody gave me a pair of UGG slippers, like house shoes. That are extremely comfortable, and I continue to love them to this day. And then immediately after that, then the world shut down and we weren't really allowed to go outside or go into, like public places anymore. And so I found that I was wearing these house shoes all of the time, like every day throughout the day, and just all the time I was wearing these house shoes. And so I ended up getting the perfect shoes for every occasion because I was just in the crib all the time at that point. So that was really interesting to me and like kind of sold me on the technique. I was like, oh, this is legit. And it in that magic way where things like come around and like you think the perfect shoes for every occasion is going to be a lot of different shoes. And then I was delivered one pair of shoes that were the perfect shoes for every occasion because there were no occasions except being in the crib all the time. And so that was really interesting to me, just like how stuff was working. Around that same time, my uncle, who I had already been to visit one time, he was diagnosed with cancer another time. This time it was pancreatic cancer, and it was his fourth diagnosis with cancer. And so and so pancreatic cancer kills people very quickly, usually. Usually at the time that you get a pancreatic cancer diagnosis, you've got like a week and a half left to live or something like that. And so my family sent out an SOS and was like, hey, they're like, this is a lot. This is where we're looking at a bad situation here. And so I brought him to the intention group, and then I also started an intention group in my family. So we would regularly come together and we would regularly intend for his benefit. And then as the group sort of like took off for a little while, then we would intend for other things as well, not just for his health, but also for, that's my mom's brother. And so she was in the group as well. And so we would intend for her health, or for somebody's money situation to get better, or their car situation to get fixed, or this kind of thing. And so we were doing that. And this is one of my maybe proudest moments here, is that we did this intention for my uncle, who probably had something like 2 weeks to live or something like that. And we ended up intending with him for another 2 years. So we spent a bunch of time just continuously intending for his progress and his, his survival and his thriving. And that, the Power of Eight intentions really seemed to be working in a strong, strong way in that moment. And so I was delighted by that, but then also really shown that, like, again, this is working. There's something that's really real about this whole situation. And so what does this mean? And what does this mean for the world? And what does this mean for my life? And what does it mean for my own journey? You know, like I had already been involved with Uncle Smokey. I had been sort of like helping him and carrying heavy things for him when he had had his third cancer diagnosis, and looking into more and more ancestor work and practice, just getting involved with the genealogy of the whole thing and all that. And then Power of Eight Intentions, and also Rune Soup is sort of like pushing in this direction of greater connection to ancestors and the dead and that kind of thing. And so really like leaning into that. But then also 2020 is happening. Polyphenale asked, do I run an intention group? I don't run an intention group anymore. I used to run just the family intention group, and we used to meet every week. And then after Uncle Smokey died, then that kind of the group became overwhelmed by grief and stopped meeting on a regular basis. I also used to run one through my Patreon and just couldn't get enough regular attendance to make it worth doing on a regular basis. It would be like one person would show up. So shout out to you, Malangeth. But yeah, so I don't run an intention group anymore. Thank you for asking though. I am open to doing that again because the tech is so tough. It's so strong. And by tough, I mean strong, not difficult. It's amazingly difficult or amazingly easy. And you like think that doing miracles is going to be heavy lifting, and it's really not. And so it's really interesting to do that. I think that the ease of it actually is a bit of a barrier for people sometimes, because it like feels like you should be working harder than you are, and you get the sense that like that'll never work because like you're not working hard enough, and so it's difficult to get people to show up to that. So that is an interesting thing about, I don't know, humanity or living in the world or something like that. But as a result of that, I don't run an intention group right now. But I do hope that one day I will be back to that, because it's a really great practice and it really improves my life. Like the act of intending improves my life. And so I really like to do that. The D. Santina Ruiz asks, what does it entail, or is it recorded? This is being recorded. I'm not doing an intention right now, and so the intention stuff. There is information on Power of Eight intentions. When I finish this, I will put something in the comment section. So this is being recorded and will be posted in my feed later. I will put something in the comment section because or maybe I'll add like a link to my bio or something like that. So you can find or also you can just Google Power of Eight intentions, and that'll come up real quick. But yeah, so anyway, I was like involved in that kind of stuff, right? So I'm doing Picatrix magic, and so in this moment also Jupiter's in Sagittarius, and so there's great Picatrix magic to be had, and then there is and I launched my business. I launched my my astrology website under an election with the sun in Aries and trying to Jupiter in Sagittarius. Looked real cute and went pretty well for me. So then I went to, and then Rune Soup, and so I'm doing sigil magic and this kind of thing, and I've got like silly, funny stories about that as well, like magic being super annoying and giving me the thing that I asked for that I didn't want, but it's the thing that I asked for. So had some stuff like that going on, and did some Power of Eight intention magic. And really did some real miracles, man. That was really, I continue even reflecting now, knowing that I was involved in some of the miracles that got done is like wild to me. It's super cool. So all of that is going on. Also, 2020 is happening, right? And so the whole COVID debacle is like happening. And at that point, I'm living in New York City. And so I am in the middle of the wildest COVID situation. There's like, and then Black Lives Matter protests are happening at the same time. And so I was just like right in the center of all that. It was a real wild time. I lost a bunch of my work. I lost a bunch of the music work. Shout out to Cliffy Simpson, who was involved in some of the band stuff that I was doing in that moment. And then it didn't work out because nobody could get a gig in that moment. And it was a lot going on there. And I was going through a big breakup in that moment too. So I was just like, I was wilding. So while I was tripping this way, then a friend of mine noticed that in January of 2021, there was going to be a moment, or there was going to be a retreat in Costa Rica, an ayahuasca retreat from the same shaman dude who I drank with in the first iteration. And so my friend was like, yo, maybe you should go check that out and like see what's going on. And so my plan was to go there and, just get some new ideas about what was happening and like how to live in the world and how to like make my life better and put my life back together and all that sort of stuff. And then, so I did a long, I did a whole long video. It was probably like 2.5 hours telling my Costa Rica story. So check that out if you want to go deep into how I arrived in Costa Rica and all of the different animal totems that showed up in that moment. But it became clear to me in that moment that it was a part of my path that has been chosen for me by the ancestors to go to Costa Rica and get involved in this medicine retreat situation. And so I went there and as a volunteer, not simply to drink medicine, but also to like work. And I ended up like managing the retreat center in much the same way that I had been managing the acupuncture clinic before. And so I went there and did that and had a time. Like it wasn't a good time, not really, but it was meaningful and I learned a lot of things and it felt really profound the whole time and it ejected me from where I was. Often that has been the way in my life, is that it has been sort of like, I want something that is simple and easy and the same. And then I'm kind of like ejected from that thing and moved into a new space. It's how I accidentally moved to New York City. It's how and all of these are typically associated with some breakup or another. And so that happened and I moved out of Costa Rica. Well, I moved out of New York to Costa Rica, lived in Costa Rica for several months, and then sort of got booted out of that situation as well and moved back to the United States and moved to my hometown, which is in the middle of the country. So I did that and I did that right in time to witness my uncle's passing. So we had been doing these intentions this whole time and his time came. His time came and he went. And it was a real big deal. I was very grateful to be able to participate in his homegoing celebration and in the whole journey. I remember, so I'm like chest deep in ancestor work at that point, like through ayahuasca and other things. I worked with a practitioner who does ancestor work specifically and these kinds of things. And so I remember talking to my uncle on his deathbed and he was thinking about what was going to come next. And I was like, I've heard that when you exit this life, before you make it to the next world, there's a passageway. You have to like leave this one and then you'll enter into the other side. And in the meantime, if you look up into the sky, then you see the most amazing starscape that ever was. That's what I've heard. And so that's what I told him, and he was like, "Oh, I'm definitely gonna make sure and look up and see those stars then." So he like made a note, made a mental note for himself to do that, and I hope that he did go see those stars. But so from that point, then I my astrology. So I was doing astrology throughout that whole time, and working toward my goal of hitting 10,000 readings and moving toward mastery of the craft and, doing more and more astrology and magic as a regular part of my practice. I like have regular practices as far as ancestor work is concerned and just like, like a saint's practice and just regular prayers and mantra stuff and all this kind of stuff, as well as this idea that plants are friends permeates my life now. I saw a video one time of like some no-name person on YouTube that was talking about how animism is, like the animism as this idea that like all the things are living. And so you're like the plants have a kind of consciousness and mountains have a kind of consciousness and all that sort of stuff. Like that is less about a belief and more about just like the way that you live your life. And so that's the direction that things have gone for me, is that I now approach everything as if it is probably alive. It's very, I can tell that people like, it's big tree hugger vibes. You know what I mean? Because I be out here and like it's springtime in my location right now. So I be out and seeing these flowers and I'll just go up to the tree and be like, "Oh my God, you're beautiful. I love this so much. Thank you so much for doing your thing." Right. And I think that that tree can hear my gratitude and speaks and like, is there with it. And so it's just the way that I live my life. And so I moved into this space where gratitude became a major part of my practice and is now maybe like the primary thing that I am trying to move toward in my life and maybe in spirituality in general, because it's so fundamentally, profoundly true. Like nothing makes your life better faster than gratitude does. And so I spend a lot of time in that space and like working with that and like being grateful for the difficulties, because how many times have it in my life have I been left by family, for example, or like I had a rough relationship with my mom who left early in my life and this kind of thing, or these different breakups. One time I was in Costa Rica. I had gone through a bad breakup before, and I was in Costa Rica just looking at the most magnificent sunset that ever existed. Those sunsets were crazy. We were on the western coast, and so you could like the sun would go down in like over the ocean and it would be amazing sky stuff, and then the like mountain range was amazing behind me and the water was beautiful and the smell of the ilang ilang, it was just like I remember being angry about how beautiful everything was. Like it was impossible for me to take in all of this beauty. And it was a little bit like cuteness aggression where you would just like want to bite the kitty or whatever, it was a little like that where it was too much for me. And I remember being there in that space and being like, man, how many times did I cry about a relationship that if I had stayed in that relationship, then I would not be able to witness this deeply profound beauty that's happening around me. You know what I mean? And so it's that kind of like gratitude for the pain, gratitude for the thing that is difficult that I try to spend a lot of my time leaning into now. So when I made it back to the United States, and then I had had a good year, a year and a half or so in 2020 and 2021. So it was George Floyd in 2020. When George Floyd died, then I was sort of catapulted to success in that moment. And I continue to have weird feelings about that because I don't necessarily like being successful on the death of someone who probably didn't deserve to die in that moment. But here I am all the same. In that moment, a lot of people started being like, well, how come the only astrologers that I know are white women? And so I got posted on several lists that were like, well, my favorite black astrologer is this list of people. And so I made a few of those lists. And because I had been doing daily and weekly forecasts on a regular basis up to that point, I was ready for the attention. And so then when I started getting a lot of attention, thousands and thousands of followers showed up all in the space of a week or something like that. I was like, I was really amazed by it. But all I had to do was continue to do what I was doing. I would just continue doing these daily and weekly forecasts and, the election report on Patreon and all this sort of stuff. Like there was an audience for that. And I just had to continue to do what I was doing. So I maintained my the eyes that started coming my way, I was able to maintain a lot of that by continuing to do what I was already doing. So I continued to practice astrology and get into rhythm and timing throughout this whole time. But when I came back to the United States, I was like, okay, it's time to get serious about some of this music also, because I've got some songs that I've been like sitting on for a long time. And one of them is hymn of Thanksgiving. Is called Thank You. It is out now. I am super proud of it. It is the theme song to What is the Time podcast. And it's 8 minutes long. And the whole thing is just you say thank you a lot with joy in your heart for that whole time. And so the idea is to bring that kind of positivity and alongside rhythm and harmony together, right? And just be able to do that whenever you want. All you got to do is press play and then like bring that kind of joy into your life, right? And so I started doing that and started like looking seriously into creating art projects that resonated alongside the spirituality that I had been developing throughout this whole time. This is how also Breathe, the breath exercise that I released a little while ago, came into existence. It is rooted in the reggae music that I had learned when I was in New York. I was in Brooklyn in a West Indian neighborhood. So I was hanging out with a lot of people who were into reggae and got deep into that. I went on tour with Anthony B for a little while. I was playing with people who played with Dennis Brown and Gregory Isaacs. A bunch of people are not going to know these names, but the real reggae heads know what I'm talking about. Like it was, I was in the thick of it. And so I took that, which is itself a deeply spiritual practice, right? Like reggae music is very much rooted in Rastafari, and it has its roots in the same religious space that I have my roots in. And so I took that and then also put that alongside stuff like Wim Hof breathing, right? This idea of like breathing super hyperventilating and then giving yourself time to sit in the peace of not breathing at all. So took those things and put them together, and then at the same time thinking about like the idea that music itself is healing, like the sound is healing. And so took all those things together and made them and married them into a project which I called Breathe, which I'm very pleased with, and made that stuff go out in the world. And so that is what I do now, is like I take all of these different things and sort of put them into the one craft that I sort of like live in together, or live in all the time now. So now I am in a place where, because I have this ancestor practice and because I have this animist attitude, it's not even necessarily a belief system as much as like it's just the way that I live. Because of those things, I do something that is closer to the old religion than like anybody I know in my life. And by the old religion, I mean the religion that was practiced by indigenous American ancestors prior to colonialism. That's what the term old religion refers to that. That's a term that I got from Vine Deloria Jr., I think, but he didn't invent it himself. That's just what that concept is. I do something that is not the old religion. Let's be real about this. Let's be clear that I don't have access to the old religion. They didn't give that to me. I wasn't really associated with those folks, and I continue to feel some ways that I was not allowed to be a part of that dynamic. But because I am not allowed into the old religion, I have to assemble something that is new, that takes from all of these different places, that takes from the music, and that takes from the togetherness of the church that I learned when I was young, and that takes from rune soup, and that takes from astrology, and 11th century the Picatrix magic and all of that sort of stuff, and takes that and builds something new from that. And what I have built in my practice, and what I continue to build now, is, as I understand it, something that is closer to the old religion than, I don't know, anything else that I've been able to see here. This is interesting to me because in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is also Potawatomi, she's Citizen Band Potawatomi. My folks are Prairie Band Potawatomi, kind of half and half. We don't need to necessarily go through all the lineage like that, but I consider Robin Wall Kimmerer an auntie. So the auntie wrote this book, Braiding Sweetgrass, which was a sensation in the world. It's one of these like New York Times bestsellers for 10 damn years or something like that. And I honestly have bought that book maybe 9 times, 10 times, something like that. I stay giving that book away. I'd be trying to get his book away all the time. But one of the primary points that she makes in that text is the need to become indigenous. And that is a concept that I think is really, really interesting. It's a little bit like re-enchanting the world, right? Which is one of the things that brought me into Rune Soup, this idea of re-enchanting the world. We have since come to understand that re-enchanting the world is not the right way to think about it, because the world never stopped being enchanted. The world has always been enchanted, and at no point, even in the 90s, was still enchanted at that point. But it's this idea that like there is enchantment or aliveness to be had here, and that even people who are downstream of machine ideals, like the idea of the machine universe rather than the living universe, people who are downstream of that idea still can be indigenous to a place. And that indigeneity comes much more from relationship to land than any particular ethnic lineage. And that is what I'm really after here, because ethnic lineage takes you to where it takes you, and I'm not necessarily trying to divest completely from ethnic lineage, but white people need a way to be in relationship to land that doesn't involve just like groveling all the time because your people are associated with colonialism. Now, I'm not saying that we just stop talking about colonialism. There is a sense that we have to stay with the trouble of that. But we who are downstream from colonialism, like I have ethnic roots in indigeneity, but I also have ethnic roots in colonialism, right? Those of us who are downstream from colonialism need a way to be in right or good relationship with land. And to be in good relationship with land is to become indigenous to the land. And so that is ultimately what I'm trying to do here. And it's why I'm constructing this thing that is that believes that the land has something to say. Like a good relationship requires listening, right? we can think about that on in a human to human sort of space. Like if I want to be friends with somebody, if I want to be partners with somebody, then that is going to require listening to that other party, right? And so, and they're going to want to listen to me too, because we are in relationship together. And so this is the kind of relationship that I would also like to have to mountains and streams and trees and soil and whoever else might be around here. I use the word who instead of what to refer to these kinds of things, like this sort of stuff, right? That construction of stuff, I think, holds the power to a more thriving world, the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. Like that becoming indigenous that Robin Wall Kimmerer refers to is a reference to relationship. But how do we do a better relationship? Well, that's what I'm here to work out and work through. So I certainly don't know, but I have some questions that are maybe worth following, lines of inquiry that are maybe worth following. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm gonna work on that a little bit. And that is what the Intro to Spirituality course is about. And that is what I hope to explore deeply throughout, I don't know, the rest of my life or something like this. Religious traditions are the thing that survived the test of time. And so we will never know. Those of us who are currently here right now, we will never know if the thing that I am working in, through, with right now will survive the test of time. There's no way for me to know that. But what I can do is create something that is alive enough to live in the world. And so that's what I'm here to do. So thank you so much for listening through all of the different threads that I have been working with in order to come together to create something that is alive. And I hope that, I don't know, I hope this document is useful if you're ready to call, if you're paying attention later to the spirituality and you're ready to call bullshit on something, then that's what this document is for. This document is to give you some ideas about where these ideas are coming from, because they are not new ideas, except that they are new ideas in the way that like sexual reproduction takes disparate things, two separate things, and makes a new thing that is not new but is new at the same time. That's what this is. That's what I'm trying to do here with religion, spirituality, and whatever else, tradition. You know, that's what I want. So thank y'all so much for being here. Appreciate you. I love you. See you next time.